Welcome to Markets Now. I'm Michelle Rook with Matt Bennett, agmarket.net. And it was a down day in pretty much everything but the wheat market. And let's start off with wheat. Was that all corrective? I mean, we were down, 9 days in a row there, Matt?
I've got to think it was corrective. I mean, that's my personal thought. The thing is that a lot of folks that were probably trying to pick a top, and some folks clearly were correct in picking some of the higher levels that we've seen in wheat, and then 9 straight days lower. If you're holding on to a short position and you're coming into a WASDE, I think a person has to ask themselves, do I want to hold this on into a WASDE? And so I think there's a fair amount of profit taking. People were covering some of those short positions. Bottom line is, I just think this wheat market was long overdue, and given the time of the month that it is with the WASDE coming up, I think that's the biggest reason you saw this buying frenzy you saw on Tuesday.
Yeah, and then corn and soybeans conversely went the opposite direction, maybe on corrective action. But we also had pretty good crop ratings, especially the first one out of the chute on soybeans, didn't we?
Yeah. I mean, fantastic rated crops. Soybeans and corn in the 70s. Corn's essentially planted. Yeah, there's a pocket here and there, but soybeans is getting awful close to that finish line as well. So you've got to think whenever you come out of the gate with that strong of condition ratings on soybeans, and corn only lost a point down to 74. That some traders are going to say, hey, this crop's off to one heck of a start. I don't want to be too overzealous as far as buying into this thing. Maybe we want to sell some of it. I think that's a lot of what you're seeing here. It just seems like a path of least resistance is lower, on corn, especially soybeans here lately.
And you mentioned some positioning ahead of the WASDE. Let's kind of talk about expectations for corn and soybeans, because we usually don't see much of an adjustment.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to see much of anything, I don't think, for production domestically. You could see a adjustment for, for instance, global production, but domestically, I think the only change you could see, is potentially some demand revisions. I don't think those are going to come in too great. And so as a producer, you're sitting here, looking at prices that have been kind of stagnant. I would say steady to lower over the last several weeks. And with that being the case, I think most people are hoping for some sort of a shot in the arm here. If you do get a shot in the arm, it could be short-lived. It is a WASDE. We do see a lot of volatility there, but by all means, I've been telling my folks, if you feel really good about your own personal prospects, it might not be a bad idea to at least get some offers in place, because the market can trade awful fast on report day. I don't know that we'll get a 10-cent higher move. It'd sure be nice if we did. But if we do and you don't have an offer in, you're going to have a hard time catching it.
Yeah. Is the one exception where we may see a yield adjustment wheat? The harvest is starting.
Oh,
It
for
sounds like
sure.
yields are better.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, with wheat, there's no doubt you could see a little bit of an adjustment. I mean, a lot of folks have thought, this wheat crop maybe is even a little bit better yet than what people projected. Yeah, it's tough for me to tell. I'm not in the heart of wheat country. I can tell you the soft red winter wheat crop, my area and farther south is just looking fantastic. But I know when you get out into parts of Kansas, as far as that winter wheat crop, it doesn't look near as good.
And world production numbers, what are we going to be watching there? And will South American numbers, will USDA slow play that again?
They probably will. I've got to think that you look at corn and beans. I mean, clearly they're talking about Argentina having some bug issues, disease issues. They thought that corn crop would have to get dialed back. Brazil, hot and dry. That crop would have to get dialed back. But I think one of the bigger question marks, a lot of folks want to see how the USDA handles it, is what does Russian wheat production look like? Is Russian wheat production going to get trimmed significantly? Some folks say the USDA could come down 10 million tons. I don't think they will, though. I mean, if they follow what they typically do, they're not going to make a large adjustment lower. But I could see them taking 2 or 3, maybe even 4 out of that crop. Certainly, it's had its fair share of issues from freezes, frost, you name it, then lack of water on the backside of it. And if that's the case, I don't know. I would think maybe that could get this wheat market at least stabilized. Today was a good day, but as far as being able to hold on to that or maintain that or get some fall through buying to show up, that remains to be seen.
Yeah. Some of the private estimates on Russian wheat mattered down to close to 80 million metric tons. Do you think that's about where we need to be on that Russian crop, or does nobody really know?
I think nobody really knows. I mean, just like all things, sometimes production cuts, it's a race to the bottom, and so is that going to be the case this year? That we're going to try to take the wind completely out of the sails, then have to come back higher. Yeah, I don't know that it's that low just yet, but I do think it's a heck of a lot lower than what we were thinking, even at last month's report.
So what about the acreage report at the end of the month? Of course, like I said, we might see some fireworks as a result of that. How much more important is this report this year just because, we've had some planting problems in some parts of the country?
It's definitely important. I'll tell you what, Michelle, if we did have 90 million acres or more on corn, like was projected previously, if you would raise acres, oh boy, it would just be a really stiff headwind. Now, a lot of folks felt like that acreage report for March, the survey was taken at about the most bearish time possible, the 1st of March, there at the end of February, 1st of March, horrible markets. We hadn't really taken off on any sort of rally effort yet. And so what was the sentiment? Sentiment was probably pretty rough for a lot of growers. And with that being the case, people felt like maybe they underplayed their hand as far as how many corn acres they were going to have. Personally, I don't look for any major adjustments there at the end of the month, but a lot of folks are talking prevent plant, Michelle. So let's say you come in and, oh yeah, we're going to raise another 500,000 acres of corn, maybe it's 90 and a half or somewhere in there. If that's the case, then there's going to be folks say, hey, it's going to be well under 90 as far as planted ends up going, just due to the fact that a lot of producers weren't able to get every acre in the ground they wanted to get in. So I do think prevent plant will become more of a discussion here, as you get into, for instance, after the July report, into August and of course September.
Do you get any questions answered about that over 6 million acres of principal crops that we could not find the acres? I mean, they just kind of disappeared.
That's a really good question. And that's part of the reason, I think that you'll see acreage potentially go up, for corn and beans and maybe even wheat, And so, yeah, there's some acres that just didn't show up to the party. People are wondering where they at, why they didn't get accounted for. But you've got to think they'll get accounted for, sooner or later. Is it going to be in this report? I don't know. Last thing I'll say about it, though, is that typically whenever profit margins are excessively high, acres seem to show up. When profit margins are the other way around, of course, acres sometimes seem to vanish. And maybe we've seen a little bit of that.
So, unless we get some big surprise in the report tomorrow, which we're not expecting, the funds, at least on corn and soybeans, have looked like they're trying to reestablish their short position. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I do. But I mean, this again is a time of year when you can get some excitement going. So if we don't get any major adjustments here, I've got to think the funds will still think, hey, we want to be short this market. Now, we all know there's a fair amount of heat that's supposed to be coming in over the next week to 10 days. And my forecast shows like 10 out of 14 days, I believe, that are in the 90s. And so if there's some areas that get back into a dryness, even a flash drought type situation, with those kind of heat readings, I certainly feel like you get people excited about this market. Are the funds going to step in here and go whole hog? Probably not after last year, seeing a couple of well-timed rain events, essentially saving a crop. But I do think that if you get into the 90s, then it gets a little bit on the dry side. It'll be a different story. I do think that there would be some buying coming here, probably very rapidly.
Yeah. We'll see if it's enough to push us above those resistance levels on the charts we can't seem to take out. Speaking of that, is that what stopped out cattle today? Did we just run into chart resistance, or is this a little caution before the Fed announcement tomorrow, or what?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at this cattle market, I mean, you just kind of come up here, get above your moving averages again, and overall, everyone knows it's bullish. Okay, it's a bullish situation. Obviously, Fed's coming out. There could be some outside indicators. What if this economy would maybe kind of get the wind let out of its sails a little bit? If that's the case, Michelle, I'll tell you what, that's one thing that could really hurt this cattle market. Anytime equities struggle, usually fat cattle prices struggle, beef prices struggle. And so I'm still longer term overall, I'm still pretty friendly based upon the demand fundamentals. But at the same time, I'm not saying we're going to go up and make new all-time highs this year either. I think you've got the fuel to do that. But whether the trade wants it to go there or not, I think is the big question.
Okay, thanks so much, Matt. Matt Bennett with agmarket.net. That is Markets Now.